Yeah, so thank you everyone, our esteemed panelists for finding time during the day for this discussion. And I'm glad to see so many faces for the last session of the day. So I hope we will deliver an engaging discussion to all of you. And without wasting any further time, I would start with Abhay sir. He's sitting just next to me. So, sir, we heard a lot about the impact of digital connectivity in the keynote by Shri Rohit sir, and there are a lot of things we can do, obviously, unlocking the power of digital applications. But at the same time, a report from Telecom Sector Skill Council reveals that we have a shortage of 10 million skilled workforce in the electronics and telecom sector. So, because you are in the industry, right? So, what sort of skill gap do you see, and what sort of shortage do you see that obviously you would like to the industry, government, and academia to work upon?
Thank you for the question. It's an interesting way to look at it. So, what I would do is let's segregate the way we look at telecom infrastructure in different layers. The first layer, which is very, very critical for telecom infrastructure, is the infrastructure layer, right? In infrastructure layer, we have towers, we have optical fiber, and then we have cloud infrastructure on which the whole thing rides. Let's look at the skill set available in India for this layer. In tower infrastructure, we have close to about 500,000 towers across board in India, and they are being managed very well. The kind of uptime that we have on the towers, the speed at which the towers come up, I don't think there is any problem there, so we have good skill set capability there. Let's look at the fiber infrastructure. Probably India is the only country which is deploying close to about 100,000 kilometers of fiber every year. So do we have a dearth of capabilities there? Of course, I can very well say that workmanship may be an issue from our standpoint, but then skill set in laying fiber is also not a big problem. So there is taken care of. Cloud infrastructure, which is the third point as far as infrastructure is concerned, there is some concern. We don't have, there are a lot of data centers which are coming up, but the capability at handling the cloud layer is something that we definitely need to improve upon, and that's one area that we need to definitely work. So that's on the base layer. Coming to the next layer, which is more like the network layer, and in this we either look at BTSs, so I don't think there is a problem with the deployment of BTSs in India. We are probably the only country, as I said, which deploys more than 125,000 to 150,000 base stations every year, year on year. Unparalleled, nobody else can do it anywhere in the world. So we do have skills there, no problem. Coming to optical infrastructure, mostly it's done by the manufacturers of the optical infrastructure, so there we are good. Same is the case as far as the network functions which go on the cloud infrastructure. So on this layer, I think it is more the vendors who have to skill their own people, but I don't see a competency gap. Then comes the most critical layer, which is the application layer. And here is where, with 5G and 6G coming in, there is a huge potential. The capability levels of Indian diaspora everywhere in the world is known for application building. Why can't that application building happen in the manner that we want it in India? The gap is not the capability of people building infrastructure, but the gap is how the network interfaces with that application. Networks are very, very complex, and therefore not every application developer can talk to the network in the manner that they need to. So it is important for the network to have API interfaces, just like what you have on phones. What Apple did, iOS or Google did, they created SDKs. SDKs are basically software development kits. They put it on the phone. Application developers need not know how complex the phone is. They just need to know what they need to do with that software development kit, and they are able to develop applications very fast. This is exactly what needs to happen from a network standpoint. So if the network is exposed, all the APIs are exposed in the form of SDKs, application developers, there are no dearth of application developers. They can come and work on it and make it happen. This is the skill gap that needs to be filled in. Then comes the biggest of all, which is the consumer. And we talked a lot about the consumer. We talked about literacy, digital literacy not being there in the rural areas and that impacting the consumption of the way the applications are used or digitization is not happening. It's not the literacy anymore, given what we have in AI being available, and I'll come to that in a moment. It is more to do, if you look at YouTube, if you look at Netflix, if you look at e-commerce applications, they are deeply penetrated in rural area. Every person in the village, they can order things. I was reading somewhere, 25% of the total e-commerce is done in rural India. And that has happened because the interfaces that those applications have, you can tell YouTube, show me this movie, and it will show you. It doesn't matter what language you are speaking. It doesn't matter whether you know to type, whether you know to write English or not. The change that needs to happen, and this is where the literacy of application developer needs to come in, is to create the UI, the user interface of application needs to change from English typing to a colloquial verbal command which can easily be converted into the required format that the application requires, and you are taking off the consumption like anything. This is what, where the initiatives like Bhashini, which is being done by Government of India on AI, will be a good help. But the way we build the interfaces of the applications is one area where we need to improve upon. The cloud infrastructure is another where we need to have a little more capabilities coming onto the pay. Otherwise, I think India is digitally fully literate and nobody can beat what we are able to do in India. That's my view, Radhika. Sorry for the long answer, but I thought I should cover the entire scope of things.
Thank you, sir. And I'll come back to you definitely on the second part of the question. But I would now like Gururaj sir to add his views, because he has obviously he was the MD of iPhone factory in Bangalore. Before that, Flextron, and now he's the MD of Optiemus. So, sir, would you share your experiences on the sort of skill gap that you see actually on the floor?
So, sir knows it all, even before my saying it. So, no, Radhika ji, we were talking about it earlier, right? Is, from a manufacturer's perspective, to me, end of the day, you can have everything, that you need devices that are affordable and you need services that are affordable. And just now, the member secretary was also saying that we also need devices, that are affordable, which are finally made in factories, right? And with Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat, we're doing it in India. So our experience, my experience, both at Optiemus and the iPhone factory, which I've headed earlier in Bangalore, is we have a huge issue on skills, right? Coach sir, I know, has heard me say this before in various forums, but he's smiling now. But I say this. The iPhones are built. I was part of one of the earliest phones that were built in India, as Motorola CDMA, and finally the iPhones in India. But the fact, even though we moved 20 years forward in manufacturing, whether it is a phone, whether it is a telecom equipment, whether it is something else, and I was telling you this earlier, starting from, say, even hand soldering, right, which is the most fundamental operation in a device, we have skill gaps. Now, my humble submission to whoever is how do we, so whether you look at, the senior most management of electronics companies in manufacturing, or whether you look at the mid-level, or whether you look at the lower level, what we call direct labor, I think there are gaps everywhere. And today what is happening is there's constant poaching. I take from somebody, company, that company takes from somebody, and then after 1 year he's back in our company with a salary hike of 30%. So I think the total talent pool is not increasing. And I know that there has been a very genuine effort on the part like TSSC, when Kocher sir was there and all that, but somewhere those programs have not appealed to the industry. They've just not. This is the reality. So how do we resolve this? My humble submission is, from whatever I have seen, I've earlier been a part of a faculty at Stanford and lived in Silicon Valley for a number of years, right? This industry-academia partnership is very critical, in my opinion. And I think that is something that has much talked about, but I think there's a lot more to happen. So I think I can say a lot of things, but the net, if I were to put it in general terms, right across the board in manufacturing from the highest to the lowest levels, we have huge skill gaps, and through industry academia partnerships, through centers of excellence, and I know these are generic statements which have been made in every conference. I think there needs to be an effort both on the part of the industry who need the people, and on the part of academia to for better collaboration.
Thank you, sir. I think this industry academia point is very interesting, which I would cover in a moment. Dilip, sir, so the Telecom Sector Skill Council report, you have your findings from the report as to, what sort of skill gap do we see? Does it really align with what Abhay sir and Gururaj sir said, or do you have something different in your findings?
Thank you, Radhika. And first of all, thank you, COI and General Co-Chair, for having me here as part of this panel. I just want to make 2 points, right? The first point, in response to your question, I'll make a third point. I think the challenge here is that from a perspective, whether right or wrong, I don't want to say, but from a perspective, if you go and talk to the people who are on the other side, the people who are in universities, the people who are in the skilling development ecosystem, or even the Telecom Sector Skill Council, I think you will come to a thing that industry is not articulating what they want, right? Today, I think the skill ecosystem is come to a sophistication in India that if an industry wants a particular person with a certain set of competencies and they communicate it, all they got to do is find a person who fits culturally, and the training providers and the Sector Skill Council can do the rest, right? And I think that maturity is there. Unfortunately, we tend to say, who will pay for it? Why can't the government pay for it? Why can't someone else pay for it? But I can guarantee you this: getting a person trained through adequately certified outside is 1/10 the cost of training that person in your company, right? So I think industry needs a new set of lens to look at it, and they have to proactively go and talk to the people, which is there, and talk to industry. And I think you'll hear more about academia, shortly. That's the first point. The second point, which I like to make, is that there is no, industry is going in a cluster, okay? So I take, requirements of a mobile phone manufacturer. It's the same as the requirements of the assembler of a, let's say, a color television or something. They're common cells. Very similar to doing an e-vehicle. People don't realize that an e-vehicle is also as complicated as has the same battery management system, et cetera, et cetera. So you need a collaboration between different industry sectors, cross-cut collaboration, and maybe talk to the Electronic Sector Skill Council and the Telecom Sector Skill Council, others, to actually identify this to scale. So, you have, and the lead can only be taken by industry. It's not fair to expect a training partner to do that, because he's actually not there. And I think that's the second point. And the third point is, which is broader in the context of Viksit Bharat, is that on average, an individual, right? And it might be controversial, but it's just a figure I'm putting out. We use 1/100th of the capability of a phone. And the customer does not know how to use the rest 99% of the capability of his phone to improve productivity, to improve knowledge, you know how to access a movie, but do you know how to access education content for your kid? So I think there is a whole kind of thing which is the industry and people need to do, is how to educate customers to use the power of the phone. The phone is a computer. We don't know. No one knows that you can actually create a PowerPoint presentation in your phone. You don't have to go to a laptop. You can do a lot of stuff. Even industry people, you don't need an Excel, thing. I mean, if you remember the first ad of Microsoft Excel was, he goes in and his boss wants a presentation. He's on the first floor, and by the time the lift goes, I don't know if you remember, I'm a kind of a dinosaur, so I know that ad. But by the time he reaches the 67th floor, his Excel presentation is there. That was a very telling ad. We need things like how to use. And the third thing, which also goes back to Abhay's point, is if you have to migrate from one phone to another phone, nobody knows how to do it. Majority of the people don't know how to do it. And that's also, we're not, but migrating from one computer to another computer, yes, you'll have people doing that. So I think that if you really want customer and livelihoods, right, you have to educate the user and then see what the benefits of the phone are. Then the benefits of connectivity would come. So when it was launched last year in mobile, this thing, Prime Minister was driving a car in Germany, right? Now, how can you navigate a bus driver in India if he's lost? Google Map takes you somewhere else, but you can't do it here, but you're demonstrating that. So how do we apply the use cases to actually change the lives of people who really require it to do that? So I'll stop here.
Thank you, sir. Some really interesting points there. And I would like to add, when we were talking about that, people might know how to consume the video content on phone, but how to consume the educational content. So one of our study, we found out that on an average, even a person in urban India, the maximum diverse number of use cases they have on their phone is like 9. This is the average. Obviously, there will be people below and above. And that's for the urban India. For rural India, the number is far less. So I think that's a very good point one needs to consider when we say, okay, X% of our population is connected, or X% of our population has now smartphones, but are they making right use of the device or not to educate themselves, to upskill themselves? So Prashant sir, I will come to you. Gururaj sir talked about industry and academia partnership and challenges out there. You have worked in the industry for such a long time, and now you are representing academia also. So what are your thoughts on those challenges, and what would you like to say on that?
Thank you, ma'am. Since this panel is mandated to discuss the entire gamut of skill gap analysis for 5G and broadband opportunities, and distinguished fellow panelists have brought out the different aspects of it very clearly. The distinguished panelists have made very elaborate comments on the skill gap from their experience and perspective. I would like to say the same thing from 4 pillars. Emerging 5G broadband skill gap analysis rests on 4 pillars. Firstly, identify the problem. Different perspectives have been given by fellow panelists. Second, the role and the investment resources which are needed to address this skill gap. Third, the community participation to address this skill gap. And fourth, the role of academia in addressing this skill gap. So coming to these 4 pillars, I will quickly cover one of first, identification of problem. While you may move from an extreme optimistic viewpoint to an extreme negative viewpoint about the skill gap, there needs to be done a scientific study about it. While telecom sector report 2023 does a very reasonably good work of addressing the skill gap in 15 specific occupations, in my opinion, to identify the skill gap, it needs to be put in a sharper focus, more delineated specific role. For example, you read a report by Irfanson and Jolly in MDPI about the Ohio state of US, which came last year. It was a peculiar state, a Midwestern state, Ohio, Idaho, both of them together. The telecom workforce had declined from 40,000 in year 2000 to almost 15,000 in 2021 when this study was done. Compare this report finding with the Telecom Skill Sector Council report finding. There are very good points in telecom sector which are needed to be taken further, like some skills will develop, some skills will decline. We need to identify them. 4 things I will like to tell. DevOps practices, Python programming, the cybersecurity expertise, and the RF spectrum, which are the 4 cornerstones of 5G stack. We need to find out which skill a DevOps practitioner needs to have to make a 5G application. Or for developing a Python simulator for 5G, what is required to be needed? If there is a developer who is a microservice architect, is it sufficient for a 5G application, or more sharper definition is required to be done? So, telecom sector report needs to be taken further, and the gaps to be identified, the skills to be identified. Some skills will decline, some skills will come up. How to do transition? That Ohio State report divides the skill gap for telecom sector in terms of declining skills and emerging skills. And it also makes a table of where the transition is easy and where is transition would be difficult. So for a Python developer who is working in a full stack Python work, we do a lot of coding for the telecom OEMs. For a 5G, how much will be needed? That is the first point. It's a sharper definition of skill gaps in terms of transition difficulty and the training requirement. Then the second pillar, from where the investment will come to address this skill gap. First, we identify the problem. So we have a lot of things, and one of the point of the panel was for the underserved area, we have a lot of investment from ESO fund. Kindly just do one check. There is a BEAD program in US, a broadband equity and accessibility program. There is a website for that, and we have a USOF website. Each project expenditure is detailed in both of them. Please compare in your own time. What I recommend is that some amount of focus of ESO spending on a skill gap address, which I will come to the third pillar, that is the community participation, is needed at this point of day. So we have covered 2 pillars. First, identify the problem in terms of specific, taking the telecom sector report further, in terms of specific skill sets, Python, Java, microservice architecture, cybersecurity, RF spectrum, and specifically write emerging and declining skill set. Then investment needed for that. You will see the Ohio report gives the investment and the median wage for each of the skill sets. We need to do that. The third pillar is the community participation. Unfortunately, we don't talk a lot about PPP word in different seminars. We will say India, P means public, means state. And another P means private, means industry. Please read the Ohio report or the Idaho report. There is another report of North Iowa University also on this. It defines P both as a state as well as community. So BEAD program feeds a lot of community digital literacy and skill set addressing program through what they call digital inclusive and inclusive associations. There is a Cleveland Community Development Project. There is a Riverside project. I can name hundreds of them, where community has come up. So other than the industry and the state and academia, I will come to the fourth pillar. There is a massive community participation to address what? The first, we identified the gap in terms of emerging and declining skill set. Then we talked about the resources, and then we talk about the community participation. Only the BEAD program in Ohio State has fed almost 930 million in skill training in 21 to 23 period, which is very instructive that without community participation, skill gap addressing will not go. The fourth pillar is academia. Now, I can talk about it because I teach also in a tier 2 college, where 90% of the students of India are in that college, where you can, if you ask students, probably, there will be a lot of difficulty in talking about the 5G opportunities. The curriculum needs to be updated, industry goes. I would recommend a very, very simple thing which can be done. The colleges and the universities in India are graded on NIRF ranking. The place where I teach has got 12 associations with IBM, with SAP, with so and so, so and so. The visiting faculty comes to teach. They are not shown, they cannot be shown as a permanent faculty for a student-teacher ratio. A student-teacher ratio has the biggest marks in NIRF ranking. So colleges lose out. They go to industry, they have partnership, the professors come from the industry bringing the latest technology. They teach students like that, but they cannot be shown as student-teacher-faculty ratio calculation. They lose out on an RAF ranking. Some amount of regulatory tweaking will do wonders. You have the CSR initiative of industry for skill gap addressing. Give them tax concession. Industry will go to the underserved areas. I mean, if still in 2024 we have 50% coverage gaps in northeastern states with comprehensive telecom development programs which we have, it is a matter of concern. So, 4 pillars I have spoken. Identify the gap in terms of emerging and declining. What will be needed specifically for DevOps, for Python, for cybersecurity, for RF spectrum, for microservice. Then talk about the resources from where they will come. Talk about then need to have a community participation as PPP. And fourth, have some incentive for academia to go. Another thing I will tell, Prime Minister Internship Program is a wonderful program. Industry has really taken up. We have employed so many in SCL in the last few months of the internship program. Let's have a faculty internship program. Faculty in tier 2 colleges have never seen industry. If they go out for 2-3 months and see in the cutting edge technology work which happens in Indian industry, in our GCCs, in different places in India where we develop code for telecom, what is the need? A faculty internship program for a short duration will be a wonderful thing. I think I have...
Yes, sir. We are actually running out of time as well, but those are really interesting insights, and I'm sure people would like to discuss more with you after the panel. So we would have loved to talk more, but running out of time. So I would like to bring everyone's attention to some facts that we also heard from Shri Rohit ji in the keynote. And then I would only give 1 minute to each panel member to leave audience with one input from them on the question I'm going to ask. So as we heard from sir, that 61% of rural population is still on 2G and 3G networks. We have done a study at GSMA also that reveals 670 million people in India are still not using mobile broadband services, which means 3G network and above. And those are the people who live under the coverage, under the footprints of mobile coverage. So it's not like that they are not connected. When we are talking about this skill gap and preparing the workforce, it's not going to come from one section of society. It's going to come from every section of society. And the reasons that we found out were in our study were that one, they are not aware of the benefits and the power of mobile internet and broadband. And Dilip sir gave a very good example of the watching, consuming the entertainment content versus educational content. Secondly, lack of digital skills and digital literacy. So those were the 2 main reasons identified. So one suggestion in 1 minute from every panel member on how we can address this problem, how we can create that awareness to tackle the usage gap. 180 million people in India are still using feature phones. How would you upgrade them to smartphones and not just upgrade them, bring them online to consume the right content? That would really make us a truly digital nation and, make us a 1 trillion economy. So we'll start with you, Dilip sir, this time.
Okay, so you put 2 questions. One, how do we upgrade?
1 minute each, sorry.
Move people out of the low-end phones to high-end phones, and how do you upgrade? See, the only way you can do that is you give them use cases which actually help them solve day-to-day problems. And it has to be voice-based. If everything will move to voice, you've gone to facial recognition, you've got to get voice-based, and if you do voice, it solves all the problem. So you actually have to go out with a huge, like you are doing the cybersecurity or the scam kind of campaigns that are there. I think a collective campaign needs to be done on how to actually improve productivity, using that. And cybersecurity has to be also integrated into that. If you don't integrate, you're going to actually end up, people will shy from using, like Abhay was telling us earlier, many businessmen have the second phone, which is a plain old telephone, not the dial tone, but the old mobile, because it cannot be hacked and cannot be tracked and all of that. So I think that's very important from that point of view.
Thank you, sir. Gururaj, sir, we'll move to you.
Ma'am, I'll just take 1 minute. I had once met the Swamiji of Akshardham, with a 12-year-old child. And he had told me that, Mr. Gururaj, you know how to build the iPhone, but your 12-year-old knows how to use it better. So I think that sums it all up. But to your question, how do we, one is, we've already talked about affordable devices and so on. And then the question is, how do we educate them? My personal opinion, I may be wrong, is there a need for them to use more? For us in cities, there is a need. And, other than the entertainment and so on, which they're familiar with, but in somebody in rural India, what is the need factor on the phone? And he will, if there is a need factor, I believe that he will come up with ways of how to use it. How do we create that need factor? That's my humble opinion.
Nice, thank you. Abhay sir, you're smiling. You have a great point in mind.
No, I actually appreciate what Guru sir has pointed out. Necessity is the need of invention. We all know that. And this we have seen rural India do it far better than we can even think of. So, rightly pointed out by both my panelist friends, the need is to change the user interface from typing English to a more vernacular speaking, colloquial user interface, which is now become very easy, given there is the advent of AI in a big way, which will really help. And second is, do they really need it? I really appreciate it. If they need it, they will find a way to use it, for sure.
Thank you, sir. Prashant, sir.
I agree to points made. Multimedia, colloquial, interface. Even an old lady in the house can switch TV channel from a particular service provider where you can do it by voice. Much easier than handling a complex TV remote. Colloquial, easy to use multimedia interface is exact answer what other panelists were also saying. To bring people from feature phone to smartphone. If they are doing it because of lack of knowledge. If they are doing it deliberately, then of course nothing can be done. Thank you.
Final thoughts from you, Dilip, sir.
I just want to just point out one thing, that if you look at the phone 3 years or 4 years from now, I don't know, maybe 2 years, you're going to get and move into a 3D phone. Today, all phones are voice and data and 2D, if you want to. Given the emergence of the metaverse and given the emergence of all of that, you're going to see that change, and with everybody putting in artificial intelligence or whatever it is into the phone and the technology is going to change, right? How we as a country be ahead of the use case development. And I think Abhay talked about the difficulty because the API is not being there earlier, etc. And that's the real challenge. That's what you need to educate people. You need to educate people in universities. You need to educate people who are actually developing programs in manufacturing. And I come back to the user. Right? The user is intelligent to do 10 use cases, but there may be actually 50 use cases that the person can use, but he doesn't know. He doesn't have a time to do that.
Thank you, everyone.